Thank you. This picture is called the Scream. And for me, what this represents is the dark night of the soul, the state in which you feel lost, disconnected, and for me, really questioning the life in general. And this is a picture, a very cute picture of me at the age of 13. And even though it doesn't necessarily look like I'm in an existential crisis, I was definitely seeking a sense of a higher purpose, something I could really live for and feel passionate about. And yeah, this makes life worth living. And as you can see in the picture, I read this Hindu book, The Autobiography of a Yogi. So I was trying everything. I was searching all over the place. And throughout this search, I felt like I landed at some personal conclusions, some sort of viewpoints that I still have today and determines my sense of what makes life worth living. One of those things I learned was secular Buddhist philosophy, a way to relate to life that feels very meaningful. But almost as importantly, I felt a lot of life purpose by reading this book, Super Intelligence. And what this book is about is the possibility to create human-like intelligence inside of a computer. And for me, if we solve this, we solve a lot of other problems humanity is facing. We can solve climate change, we can solve cancer, we can really solve anything. And as a result of reading this book, I got really, really determined. This is my life purpose. I want to be part of this, and I want to steer it in a good direction. This led me to drop out of high school. To then, I booked a flight ticket without my parents knowing to Singapore. I was doing AI research for a short while there, and then starting my company, Depict, where we raised over $20 million in funding, and we're applying in e-commerce. And in this book, there was a graph like this. This graph represents Moore's law. And Moore's law is the reason we have smartphones. It's the reason we have such a modern society today. Because since the 70s, we've seen a doubling every 2 years in the compute capability per dollar. And you have to remember, this is an exponential trend. So every 2 years, we're doubling on top of all the previous progress we've made. And what Nick Bostrom argued in this book is that at some point, given enough computer power, we could literally simulate evolution. Because we know we could create human-like intelligence through evolution. And it's quite a simple algorithm. And if we have enough compute, he argued that we will do the same. And if we move forward today, 2024, we're seeing amazing AI breakthroughs like this, Sora, where we can create photorealistic videos just based on a prompt. Or we're having companies beating OpenAI at their own game, overtaking ChatGPT. And we're also seeing really sci-fi examples, such as being able to read human brains. Just based on an fMRI scan, we can recreate what someone is seeing visually. And the reason we're seeing all of this progress comes back to what Nick Bostrom predicted. And this, what I'm going to show now, is the main message I want you to take away. So I want you to pay close attention. The reason we're seeing all of this AI progress today is because we have figured out the equivalent of E equals mc squared in physics, but for AI. And for me, it's kind of insane that we're not talking about this all the time, because as a result of this discovery that really got crystallized around 4 years ago only, so we've had a long history of AI research, but since 4 years ago, I would say we've figured out the equivalent of E equals mc squared, and that's this thing called scaling laws, which is this law where, not exactly right, the more computer power we can feed in to train huge language AI models, and the more data we get, the smarter they become. And this is a very predictable trend that doesn't see any diminishing returns. So this means that we can work backwards. We know Moore's law, for instance. We know that Moore's law increases our compute capabilities every year exponentially. And we can feed a lot of money into this because we know the financial implications of creating smarter and smarter AI. And then we have Sam Altman saying things such as, it's almost like this law decided by God. It just works. And now what OpenAI and other AI labs are doing is they're racing to figure out who can get the most computer power into these models. Hence, we're seeing Sam Altman raising $7 trillion for AI chips. That's 5% of world GDP. That's also why we're seeing NVIDIA stock growing like crazy. NVIDIA is now the third most valuable company in the world. And the reason is because a bunch of analysts have gone into the details of these scaling laws. And they figured out that, wow, this actually works. The more computer power, the more data we put in, the smarter these models get. Hence, there's billions and billions of dollars invested in NVIDIA because they have monopoly on computer chips. So this is kind of unprecedented, and I don't hear us talking about this. This impacts US students because in a few years, AI will be able to do certain things that you're studying for. As companies, you need to figure out what's the moat we have outside of just capabilities that future models will have. And then also as citizens of society, we need to take a stance on what we're going to do when AI gets more and more intelligent. And I want to walk through some examples where we have GPT-3. It's a very technical name for ChatGPT. GPT-3 was the model that led to ChatGPT, which we all know about. And the main difference between GPT-2, which was the previous model, and GPT-3 was a 100x increase in compute. So it's quite simple. We have the same fundamental computing building blocks, but we 100x the amount of compute, and you get one of the fastest growing applications in history. Moving forward to GPT-4, which is the model we have today, the main difference between GPT-3 and GPT-4 was another 100x scale-up in compute. And a 100x scale-up isn't as much as you think, because we have Moore's law. People are figuring out the financial returns of investing more and more money into this. Researchers are finding all these efficiency improvements to utilize compute. And to show an example of how much more intelligent GPT-4 got, I want to show this. This is the bar exam. It's the main exam to get certified as a lawyer in the United States. And before, with GPT-3, it answered the questions correctly 10% of the time. And GPT-4 answered it correctly 90% of the time. So it went from 10% to 90%. And US students, you all know about the capabilities of using ChatGPT for your schoolwork. So you all know this very well. And here it gets a bit more interesting, because I don't see any reason for this scaling law to not continue working. So by the end of 2024, by the end of this year, we're very probably going to have a GPT-5. And the main difference between GPT-4 and GPT-5 is going to be another 100x increase in compute. So we don't need any fundamental scientific breakthrough here. It's really a scaling operation that's happening here. And we're probably going to see the equivalent intelligence increase as we had from GPT-3 to GPT-4 happening again with GPT-5. And unless you as a worker, a student, or as a business think about what's my moat outside of the capabilities that GPT-5 will have, let's say, you will have a harder and harder time in the workforce or as a company competing against other companies. I think that GPT-4 is probably a bit overhyped. GPT-5 will probably lead to very, very, very impressive things that we can accomplish. And to show where this is going, the top AI labs are already preparing infrastructure for GPT-6. And they're dealing with problems such as ensuring that local power grids don't get shut down as a result of how much electricity they're using for the data centers. Those are the kind of bottlenecks we're dealing with. And it's hard to predict how this will look, but it will probably be very, very intelligent. And at this point, I think we're going to see some professions getting kind of wiped out. And also, it's at this point we will probably really look at regulation. People will wake up very intensively to the need for regulation on these kinds of things, which we don't have today. And just one example was that I was on Swedish television a few weeks ago, and I showed what happened when you take an open source models without any safety constraints. I removed the safety constraints. And I asked, how can I kill thousands of people in Stockholm? It's kind of a scary prompt. And the answer I got was step-by-step instructions on how I can contaminate the water sources in Sweden. I won't go into more detail, but this is possible today. Some might argue you can get this information on the dark web, but we know the capabilities are going to increase and increase and increase. We don't have any protection against things like this. So unless we get any regulation, we're going to see another 100x scale up. And by GPT-7, we probably would have AI that's almost as good as human AI researchers at doing AI research. So what you can do then is you can scale up billions of AI researchers that work 162 hours a week on making smarter versions of themselves. And for every 1% improvement they make, they get 1% faster. And they're working at superhuman speeds. You know how fast computers are. And here, I would argue we will have AGI, artificial general intelligence. And how would I explain artificial general intelligence? The most concrete way to put it is that most of us will be out of a job, because AI will do it much better than us. That's what AGI is. And don't just listen to me, listen to the CEOs of the top AI labs. These are the top 3 AI labs in the world. And they all talk openly about the scaling laws. And there's, of course, a lot of unknowns in this. We're in really uncharted territory. But they all have been quoted saying, we will probably, given how things are panning out, have AGI before 2030. And here we are, assuming like everything is normal. So, to conclude, we have figured out the equivalent of E equals mc squared for AI. It's these scaling laws where the more compute, the more data we put in, the more intelligent these models get. And the top AI labs are in a race to get as much compute as possible. Sam Altman raising $7 trillion for this. And what I would ask myself, given this, is as a student or as a worker, what's my moat? How can I position myself in a world where we get more and more capabilities? As a business, what's my moat? And then, most importantly, as a citizen, what do we want to do given this progress? Do we want all of the progress being in the hands of private companies, where we have very little regulation today? Or do we want to take action to see something different? So that's everything for me, and I hope it was useful. Thanks.